So I think one of the more interesting things, Jaden, when you and I are looking for the stories to cover that actually tell a different story. So of course there's the big stories like, oh, what's happening with, GPT 5.6 or whatever. But you found one that I love because I don't know if it's a canary in a coal mine, but it's a deeper story that I'm sure most people didn't see. And that story is that Amazon is shutting down what they call Mechanical Turk. And if you know Mechanical Turk, like historically, like this was a thing at like carnivals and things like that. But this is a crowdsourcing platform that once trained all these early AI models, right? So this is sort of, back in the day when this was sort of like using humans to train this. And I was looking at this and I was like, I don't know if this is much of a story. And Jaden was like, no, this story is actually crazy. We kind of have to talk about it because it actually shows something that I think a lot of people are missing. And it's in the same way, sort of like when you're looking for hints about like what the next iPhone is going to be, you look all the way down the supply chain rather. This is Jaden looking up the AI supply chain to the future of work. And I just thought it was really cool how you were thinking about this. Can you describe to the good people out there what, in basic terms, because people are not going to understand what Mechanical Turk is, or most won't. Can you sort of like talk about like why this was important and what the significance of trying to close it down is?
Okay, so this is just a fascinating story. So like story time, I'll share Mechanical Turk. And I've known about this company for, probably 10 years. I, was recommended it back in the day. It was, it went through many different iterations, but essentially it's a crowdsourcing, sort of like Fiverr in a way, but kind of like Upwork where you'll post like a job, usually like a small micro task. And the idea was there's some tasks that are still not economically viable for a computer or for AI to do. And I mean, this thing's 21 years old. So a long time ago, this was more relevant than it is today, which is why it's shutting down. But there was these kind of micro tasks where you'd say, look, I need you to go and, download my app and test out this screen on my app and then send me a screenshot of what it looks like. I'm doing like QA testing or something. And it's $4 for everyone that does this task. And you get like 1,000 people, usually people from like Indonesia and India and the Philippines would be a lot of the people because it'd be cheaper or whatever. Anyways, you put like these kind of micro tasks with a micro payment and you get like a whole bunch of people to do them. That was the idea of it. And it went through like a lot of different iterations, but it's like all the way from back in 2025 that this thing started to do these kind of micro tasks. There was a lot of like tagging images. There was judging sentiment in the short piece of text. There was solving CAPTCHAs, which is actually kind of hilarious because like they had basically like AI couldn't solve CAPTCHAs. I mean, even today it's pretty guardrailed. So it's kind of a funny use case, but like you'd have people just log in and solve these CAPTCHAs because you have like a bot running something somewhere that a CAPTCHA keeps popping up. The bot can't solve the CAPTCHA, so people are getting paid 25 cents to just go and to solve like endless CAPTCHAs and like iframe portal. Anyways, it's hilarious. It's funny that Amazon owns this thing and there's like all sorts of like gray hat stuff going on with it. Okay, the reason why this is an interesting thing for me is because Amazon just said on their website they're going to stop it. They're not going to fully shut this down, but they're going to stop accepting new customers. So basically, they're kind of shutting off any new growth. And I think they're signaling to everyone, look, this thing is going to die. You probably should move on if you haven't already. We're not going to take on any new customers. They said that they are going to let current customers keep access to it, but they're not going to add any new features. They're going to add, security updates if there's any sort of security vulnerabilities. And the reason why for all of this, because I mean, this is a 20-year-old platform. It's owned by Amazon. It's, in the past been incredibly successful. So why are they pulling the plug? They said that in 2023, which was 3 years ago, they did an analysis that found that 33 to 46% of Mechanical Turk workers were using LLMs to complete tasks. So if, let's say, close to 50% 3 years ago, what do you think it is today? What do you think it is when you have Claude Cowork, that any of these tasks I could just copy and paste into my browser or into my Claude Cowork and it will run away and do the whole thing? And I think like it's not even so much a quality issue where they're worried that all of the freelancers in the world are going to be using Claude to do it. Really what's happening is companies are shifting most of their production. And essentially what we're saying is we have now officially got to a point where the premise of this company is no longer valid. The premise was there's micro tasks that computers cannot economically solve better or cheaper than humans. And that has officially switched. The micro tasks of the internet that have been, needing to be solved for the last 20 years, the computers have solved them and at a affordable, economically viable rate. And so essentially, like, we don't need this entire ecosystem anymore because AI has solved it. Now, okay, so that's basically the premise of what's going on and why I think it's so interesting. I would love to get your take on that, Connor, and then I want to talk about one other really interesting element of what's going on here.
Yeah, no, it really is an interesting story, and it also feeds in, and I don't want to kind of like take us off on sort of a different direction here, but it also hints at as like, so this, like, from what I understand, Jaden, what had been explaining to me before we got on the air here, um was, these are fairly mechanical things, no pun intended, right? Like,
Yeah.
these are sort of like, they just need people to do it, which makes it a great gig work for folks. I mean, if you think about, like, Uber drivers are essentially a commodity to a certain extent. It's somebody that's going to drive a car, and that's why, self-driving cars is such a threat to that kind of economy, when it's just, when you're not getting a more or less value out of somebody else doing that in the same way. You have an automatic dishwasher. In the past, it was all dishes were washed by hand, but now you have an automatic dishwasher. Same result. When you have the same result, but it can be mechanized in some way, just kind of like self-driving cars, it's kind of like coming and things like that. This is even more impactful, I think, because with something like self-driving cars, there's a whole psychological element to it, right? That people just don't feel comfortable with. But this is, as you kind of said, this is like a real invisible gig economy kind of thing that I think that people don't really see. And then, Jaden, the other thing it kind of like sparks my thinking on, which I don't want to take us down this path yet until I get more, sort of like where you're already taking this. But it's sort of like, it's almost like it's sort of like this is like the single cell amoeba kind of thing that's going to like slowly develop into something else, right? Like, this is
Mhm.
at the very foundational level, and as AI gets kind of smarter and smarter and smarter, it is going to sort of like work its way up the food chain, so to speak. So we're sort of like starting to see glimmers of this in the entry level economy. But again, if you kind of compare the single cell amoeba to, a peregrine falcon or something like that, that's the difference between this kind of like gig economy solving a capture versus, an entry level person coming into a law firm or something like that, right? So you sort of like see where this evolution is going. So two thoughts on it is, number one, this is coming. It's a tide coming in. It's like living on the outer banks of, like,
Yep.
the Carolinas. Like, it looks fine now, guys. In 20 years, that house is not going to be there. That's what climate change. It just, that's the future. Don't know what to tell you. So that kind of makes me a little nervous, but it also then makes me wonder, and this is off on a tangent. So, Jane, I want to come back to you for a second, but just kind of put a pin on this one. Is this idea that, like, I wonder if this gets oddly disrupted, because my thought is that AI is just going to sound more and more the same, and people are going to be so desperate, like on LinkedIn, just when you have a human commenting on your thing, you're like, thank you, human. I
Yeah.
love this, as opposed to the real telling quote here was blah, blah, blah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so I just wonder if this is going to be a little different in that it may get disrupted on behalf of people's um, craving for or need for authenticity, as opposed to sort of like lowest common denominator AI. Anyway, that's a
Yeah.
little bit tangential, but it's just an interesting thought.
No, totally interesting. I mean, first and foremost, Connor's now making me question my beach house I've been eyeing on the Outer Banks in North Carolina. So I gotta rethink my life now. Maybe invest in some pylons or something.
Yes.
Somehow there's still $1 million, but I guess we're getting all be knocked out in 20 years. Okay,
Yeah.
so what's interesting with this company in particular? I'll give you a little bit more of the background lore
Yeah. Go ahead.
because its evolution is interesting for I think what we're going to see in the future. And like you mentioned, spoiler alert, this is coming to other areas as well. But anyways, back in 2018, I think Amazon saw that a lot of this gig work was even back then was kind of wrapping up. And this is 8 years ago. So they basically repositioned Mechanical Turk. Oh, and by the way, the thing that I think is interesting is when you have a company like Amazon owning something like Mechanical Turk, it's not like Fiverr. So Fiverr has taken a very different approach where they're like, we're leaning into AI. All of our people
Yep.
use AI. But also Fiverr only has Fiverr, and Fiverr can't shut itself down. So they really have to fight to make themselves useful and evolve. And anyways, I love Fiverr. It's a company I've used so much throughout my life, but it's just interesting that the positioning, because Amazon's basically like, look, we're making $1 trillion from AWS and from Amazon. Like, this thing was like a component. This is probably a company they bought. I actually don't know the history of it, but this is the company that they've been running. If it's not making that much money, if it's not that relevant, they're just like, we're just going to shut down new users. Fiverr's not going to do that. They're going to
Yep.
keep trying to reinvent themselves, even if
100%.
the economy or industry as a whole shuts them down, which I don't think they will. I think, Fiverr's got all sorts of pivots and moves left. But anyways, just as an interesting point. So anyways, they started repositioning themselves in 2018 because they're a massive company. And if they see the tides changing, they got to figure out how their platform is still relevant. And they repositioned themselves as a data annotation layer for SageMaker AI, one of their other companies. So very smart on their
Okay.
part. And basically companies could label training data with all of this. So that actually made this a very useful company for a long time. A lot of big machine learning stacks were running on this, and this was like a really big part of them. But one other funny thing that it did was it basically got Mechanical Turks. It had a bit of a reputation as the hidden human layer inside of products that are marketed as AI. There's a bunch of famous examples. I think one of them was Builder.ai. There's a whole bunch. So before ChatGPT, there was like an AI boom where a bunch of these companies raised money for AI, but we weren't there yet. We didn't have the LLMs to power it. People were doing a lot of stuff in AI, but it wasn't as good. It wasn't as
Yeah.
big and famous, whatever. So basically what a lot of these companies would do is they'd say we're starting an AI company. They'd raise money like Builder.ai did. And I mean, no allegations on Builder.ai. They're still around, but they had a massive lawsuit. I think they had to pay like $250 million or something because they raised money from investors, said that they had AI that built these apps for people. And in reality, when you said, build me an app, there was a developer in India that was like spinning this thing up and was like, we'll get back to you in 2 days. And it's like, oh, the AI built your app in 2 days. And really they're like using templates and stuff. Anyways, so it just, I mean, they probably gave people great outputs back then. I don't really know, but the way that they presented it was misleading. So anyways, there's a lot of companies doing that, and a lot of them were relying on Mechanical Turk to actually power that. So if you had an AI that accomplished things, really they were just like, and it's not economically viable to run up all the servers and to spin up our own AI model. So we're just sending it to Mechanical Turk to get your job done. And oh, look, AI did this incredible thing for you. Okay, so anyways, that was kind of a funny thing it went through. And then, like I mentioned, it shifted to now basically everyone on there is using AI to accomplish their tasks. So now that they've pulled this plug, basically the reaction that we're seeing from everybody, Reddit, someone said that they had, this Mechanical Turks effectively died years ago because workers and researchers abandoned it because of bots and fraud. And essentially what's happening now, the last thing I'm seeing that it's sticking around for, because basically if you want this kind of data labeling, you're going to go to a company like Scale AI or Surge AI, or you're going to have an in-house team, a lot of these frontier labs, because they have, all of their freelancers are vetted. And, this was a little bit kind of just like the free crazy market of the internet. So all sorts of bots and stuff were going on. But in any case, the last area that I think is really relying heavily on this is a lot of researchers use it for getting like data samples, the last questions, and have people fill out forms. Anyway, so there's some interesting things, and I think Amazon doesn't want to shut it down for the researchers, so they're leaving it open for that. But I think really this is probably the final chapter for this. What happens in the next, maybe like 2 years on this platform, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a full plug pulled on it once we realize the servers might not be worth keeping up. Okay, where does this go? This was kind of the gig economy. It was this huge market. Millions of people use this. It's going to get shut down or phased out in the next 2 years because AI is effectively taken over. What are the next segments? What are the next areas that this tide is just slowly going to kind of cover? And what should people be concerned about? Because Connor, probably a lot of people listening to this are like, oh my gosh, AI is coming for jobs. But I think there's an important word that you used when you were explaining this, which is the tide coming in. And even your generous timeline for my beach house on the Outer Banks of 20 years. 20 years, right? The tide coming in. This isn't a giant tsunami that is going to smash the economy. If the tide is coming in, if we see a trend and something moving in a direction, we shouldn't be afraid that everything's going to get smashed and shattered tomorrow. But we should start repositioning ourselves. We should start putting pylons around our Outer Banks house. So even if the whole beach gets covered, I can still have my, my house.
Yeah, your fancy beach house that you're gonna get. Yeah, I mean, Jaden's gonna move his family into this beach house. It's gonna get swamped. Here's the thing, I keep wrestling with this because I'm just wondering, are we the people back in the 50s who are like, oh, you got to keep forget air conditioning, that'll drive everybody inside. We need to be out on our porches. Is that us right now? Are we like the people who are like, but we still need human? I tend to think that human authenticity is going to be at a premium, and I think that there's going to be sort of like a huge, reversion to that to a huge extent. Even though AI is going to get better and better and better, I just think people are craving. I think people are craving it now. I'm not sure. I don't see it going in reverse. So I guess I'm just thinking that in as much as it seems easy to sort of just kind of kill this gig economy and not have humans in the loop on that kind of stuff anymore, I think there's no there's simply no substitute for sort of getting human feedback on stuff. I just don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong on that, and this is me, huge AI optimist. So it's going to be fascinating to see. But I think that, again, sort of as Jaden brought it up, this is the kind of the canary in the coal mine. This is something that we have to kind of keep an eye on, because this is what it looks like when very, very early entry level positions start getting replaced. listen, guys, like these are the conversations that we love having here. Also, if you are sort of like somebody who is exploring AI just as we are, cannot emphasize enough that if you have not already, check out Jaden's AIbox.ai. It's huge. It's actually gotten like really big, which I'm super psyched about for him and for his family and everything else. But it's also just such an unbelievably practical thing. It's like saves you. I'm not going to say it saves you hundreds of dollars. It just saves me that much. So because instead of essentially subscribing to all these things, I can use this tool to just compare models back and forth, and it's unbelievably helpful when I'm sort of like doing my work at AI Mindset. Check it out. And otherwise, guys, we will see you here in the next episode.